Good evening, everyone. My name is Caleb Rothy. I'm the Percussion Education Coordinator for WGI Sport of the Arts, and I'm here joined this evening by Kevin Shaw. Kevin, hello. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Caleb?
It's going great. Kevin, for those of you that may not know him, he is a member of the Percussion Steering Committee for our activity, as well as a member of the WGI Board of Directors. In terms of the groups that he works with, Kevin is a designer for Arcadia High School, Broken City, and Vista Marietta High School. And I kind of thought Kevin was the perfect person to join me on this. We want to talk a little bit about tonight, a little bit about sampling. I want to talk about rhythmic intent, breaking up and chopping up samples, specifically those with lyrics and things like that. And so Kevin has extensive experience both doing this and then also at the advisory board level and the steering committee level, talking about the philosophy behind this and all the rationale and the reasons for the policy and kind of the way it lays out. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so here's the reason that he and I are kind of getting together. There was a rule change that happened during this last offseason. It was more of a clarification to the current rhythmic intent rule than it was a change. But because of that, it means that things will be perhaps a little bit different this season than they were last season. So we wanted to get together and talk about exactly what that clarification was, how things might have changed. And most specifically, we want to share as much information as possible to make sure that everybody can do things the right way, both in terms of being within the letter of the law for this rule, as well as being within the spirit of the law, making sure that we're going about doing things and performing our programs the way that it's intended to be, based on the kind of the rules and the regulations that the advisory board has laid out. So that's the goal, is we want to be as helpful as possible with this and kind of dive into the concept. So I figured a good place to start with this, Kevin, would be for us to just kind of read the rule and read what's on the books right now. So for the 2020 season and going forward, this is the rule as it is written in the rule book. No single triggered electronic sound may produce rhythmic intent. Lyrics with rhythmic intent may be performed on a per word basis. Spoken word phrases without rhythmic intent may be performed with a single trigger. All sampled material must be triggered in real time. So Kevin, really it's just that last sentence that is the thing that is an addition or a change between 2019 and 2020. Can you talk to us a little bit about the change that the PAB made this last offseason?
Yeah, I think, every once in a while we try to clean up the rule book just a little bit to make sure it's concise and up to date, and all the language in there, is kind of mirroring our current practice. It's all kind of little minor changes. It's not philosophical edits. But when we did that, I think we ended up kind of creating a philosophical loophole the last time we made a little cleanup to this rule. And what ended up happening was we created potentially an option for people to, maybe not be creating their samples with the intent of the rule, or the identity of creating lyrics that are presented by word in real time, as in they're triggered. You're hearing the word as the trigger is being pressed. I think that we just created a loophole, so we were trying to clean it up a little bit, and that adding that sentence kind of closes that loophole.
Yep, absolutely. Can you give us a little bit of insight into some of the conversations that were had in the room at the PAB meeting? Because I know not everybody is universally of the same opinion on this, but kind of a majority consensus did emerge. So can you give us some insight into those conversations?
Sure. This is something that has been, an on and off hot topic over the last few years. I think there's some people in the camp of let it open up and, just let everyone have designer freedom and sample things the way they want. And then there's definitely some people, I think the majority of the people in that room, in the camp of, we need to perform everything in real time. And I think one part of that philosophy is that, it's, at least in the percussion, Winter Guard percussion side of this activity, just all of pageantry in general, we're creating the entire soundtrack with just the percussion instruments and the electronics. Whereas in some of the other facets of pageantry, we have woodwinds and brass, primarily you're creating the melodic content, and just the soundtrack, like the meat of the soundtrack, is being created by wind sections. Even though all those electronic layers are there and people are using recorded vocals and singing and all of that stuff, the primary flesh of the musical content is coming from the wind section. Whereas in the percussion activity, it's very possible that the primary flesh of your musical identity is coming from your electronics, your vocals, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that part of it is a reason why, there's a lot of, what's the right word? There's just a lot of people that feel like we need to kind of uphold this. There's like the sanctity of the performance in real time, and making sure that all the melodic content, all the musical content that's being presented is being performed as closely as possible within the realm of the student's performance.
Yeah, one of my takeaways whenever I hear that conversation is wanting to put the onus of that performance in the student's hands. And so obviously, if we were going to have a student play back a melody on a vibraphone or a marimba or something like that, they would do it in real time. You got to strike each one of the bars. And so it does make sense when you're using, spoken word as narration. It makes sense to me that would be a one shot. It also, I understand the argument of when you're using spoken word, or when you're using lyrics as like the main melodic device, you would want that to also be performed in real time. I think the audience wants that. I think the judges want that. I think we want our performers to do that. Certainly it's not unanimous out there, but would you agree that was kind of the majority consensus that emerged from the room, at least in terms of this year's conversation?
Yeah, I think that the fact that there's a trust that, in a competitive activity, that there has to be some sort of trust element, and I think that the fact that we in our percussion activity are, been creating so much of our content using lyrics and vocal lines, like just for the level playing field, we need to be able to perform that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I was at the WGI judges meeting a few weeks ago, and we were kind of going over some of these rule changes. And so this one came up, and we mentioned it to all the judges. And one of the things that really resonated with them was still this desire that when they're sitting in that chair, they want to trust that everything that they're hearing is being created by the performers in front of them in real time. And to have some of those melodic components not be that anymore in their minds, they said, well, that means then like everything kind of becomes suspect. And I don't know what to trust, what I'm hearing, if we keep it, consistent, where everything I hear, I know is being performed in real time by those students in front of me. They're the ones that are making music. They're making that soundtrack. That means they can credit it. That means they can reward that. They can use that as a differentiator when they're, evaluating the contest and the competition. And it certainly speaks to even, a higher art form when you're hearing all those performers be responsible for bringing those performances to life in real time for the audience.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important that, once we open that door, then, like you said, then the assumption is going to be that, well, everything is just one trigger, because there's no way to know that everything it's either one or the other. It's, it's either chopped up or it's not. And there's no way to kind of know as an objective listener or viewer if anything was, being triggered in real time or not.
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of last year, when we didn't have the real time component on the books, I was just trying to think through, like, what's a way that it could have been. You mentioned a loophole, and that, that loophole could have been exploited. One of the ways that we saw on the steering committee were times where a performer would have 5 samples, and rather than playing each one of those 5 in real time on a sampler or a keyboard or something like that, they'd basically press all 5 keys at once. And it had been engineered previously to where the sample on the second key is delayed by 1.2 milliseconds, and then the next one is 3.8 milliseconds. And so all the performer had to do is basically play a chord, and then a rhythmic melody came out of the instrument. And so essentially, Kevin, that's the kind of loophole that we were clearing up. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it basically is, even though the work has been done in terms of chopping up those vocals, as far as the students' presentation is still a one strike, even though they're striking 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 keys at the same time. It's one rhythmic strike that is creating a passage that has multiple rhythmic, enunciations per word.
Yep, absolutely. So Kevin, you're involved in a lot of programs that I know make extensive use of lyric sampling. Sometimes it's a great musical tool, but it's also a great device, effect device that you utilize in the shows. And I have had some people come up to me and say, look, you're kidding me. There's no way that Broken City is breaking up all that stuff. The playback is so smooth. It sounds so fantastic. There's no way that somebody's doing that live in real time. And I know you have shared with me before, like, the edit list. I've seen it of just all of these, dozens and dozens of samples necessary to play back a few bars of music, especially considering how complex some of those events are musically. One of the things I asked Kevin to do was to kind of share that process with us and show us even like a little excerpt of, Kevin, I think it's Broken City that you have for us. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a little excerpt from a show a couple of years ago. It's an actual part in the show. And it kind of breaks down exactly what it looks like on the score and then exactly how it's broken out on the keyboard sampler and how the performers have to be responsible for performing it back in real time. I think this is a good example of exactly how we would want all ensembles to be, both within the letter of the rule, but also within the spirit of the rule. Kevin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And, it's been a process that a lot of us have just over the years figured out how to do it in a way that where the presentation feels like it's a one-shot trigger. But, and that there's a lot of little tips and tricks and tools, and it's all very circumstantial to the performance that you're trying to edit and chop up. Sometimes it's super easy because the performer just saying it so clearly and there's space between the words, and sometimes it's super soupy and you have to kind of crossfade stuff, but still live within the spirit of the rule. And I think that that's important, that we are really trying to recreate the rhythmic spirit of each word, even though that there's some crossfades that need to happen.
Yeah. So let's take a look at that example, and then when we come back, Kevin, maybe you can break down your approach and how you go about making this sound fantastic.
Sure.
All right, we've got this little passage here from Broken City 2018, and it's all chopped up. So when I play the keyboard, you'll hear the words separately. Here's the first one, fighting. Fighting tides all this time. It's me that I've been haunted by. So pretty messed up, but when it's played in time, 1, 2, 3. Fighting tides all this time. It's me that I've been haunted by. Try that again. 1, 2, 3. Fighting tides all this time. It's me that I've been haunted by. All right. So all chopped up by word, and everything is happening per strike.
Okay, so Kevin, I thought that was super clear and really easy to understand, and I think is a great kind of tutorial for anybody that's just getting started in this, or maybe he's even doing it for a couple of years and realizes after watching this, like, oh shoot, there's a couple things I should be doing differently to make sure I'm within the spirit of the rule and make sure that we've got kind of a level playing field for all of our ensembles. Can you walk us through a little bit about your technique and your approach to chopping things up and to getting the performance to sound fantastic?
Sure. So the first thing is you just have to kind of you have to look at the passage, and you have to really, when you open it on your DAW, you got to look at the waveform and really, when you can see the way that the wave is moving as the timeline goes by and you hit play, you can really see if there's transients, like if there's spikes in the waves every time there's a word, because that's going to make your life way easier when you go to chop it, because you can just kind of know right where you're going to do your quick little crossfades. So generally, there's the other context that you have to look out for is depends on the syllable at the beginning of the word, right? If you have a hard syllable like T's and P's, those are going to be tricky because you have to really make sure that you're starting that word or that sample. You can't really start it before that letter because you're just going to get like a lot of swoop in. And then if you start it too late, you're not going to get the actual, enunciation. So look out for those kind of things. And then really the general trick is that you start with the first word and you fade it out right at the beginning of the second word, just enough so that you might hear the beginning of the second word, but it's just enough so that when you trigger the second word, that there is an overlap enough to kind of help make sure that the audience is not hearing a gap. You know what I mean? So if you notice on the playback of the chunk that I did, I would say 99% of each triggered sample is the first word. And then the very last 1 or 2% is kind of fading into the second word. And in this set of lyrics, it's actually pretty close. It's pretty good that you don't hear a ton of overlap. But maybe at the end, on That I've Been, there's because it's the way that he sung it is so close together that the overlaps are maybe a little bit more present. But as far as the technique, that's the technique that I use. I kind of made a little diagram I was telling Caleb about, but let's say these are the lyrics, right? And so basically I'm starting the sound here. This is one trigger sampling. And then as it gets into rule, it's going to fade out into the R a little bit. Whatever the rhythm is, it doesn't matter because it's all within one word. And then I got to make sure that I'm triggering rule right at the beginning before the R, right as the R sneaks into the sound. And then that's going to have a little bit of a steeper automation, faded, because you want to hear the rule as a part of the second sample and not necessarily as a part of the first sample. So, and then the last piece of advice I would give is it is very time consuming. The worst thing the traps that I've fallen into are doing, 17 words in a row in the DAW and then going and putting it into the sampler and then realizing my chops were really, really bad. And then now I have to go back and redo it. So I think for me, my process is I literally do one word, then I put it into the sampler, I do the next word, and then I make sure the crossfades are good. If they're not good, I go back and I kind of tweak the crossfades. So it takes more time, as I was showing you performing it, I perform it at home and make sure that I can do it and that the rhythms that I notate are playing back correctly. And so that when I go and teach the student, there's there's nothing that I haven't personally as a designer considered in terms of their performance. If I can do it, I know they can do it.
Yep, absolutely. The other thing I want to mention in all this, Kevin, is all of this is still totally optional, right? You don't have to have lyrics with rhythmic intent in your show. You don't have to break up a whole bunch of samples and incorporate that. There are successful programs out there every year that don't use any of this. This is just if you want to use a vocal as part of your performance, you got to find a way to be able to perform it back just like you would on any other instrument if it was voice on a different instrument. And so this is the technique and some of the work behind it to make sure that you're within the spirit of all of this, so that all of our ensembles are performing everything live in real time at that event for the audience that day. Correct?
Absolutely. And I think, like I said, just over the years, I haven't really run into issues with anyone on this, only because when it's time to show people what we're doing, we're staying within the spirit of it, and I think someone could argue that the crossfades potentially violate the letter of the law, but for me, as far as my application, I've been really trying hard to make sure that I'm following the spirit of the law and then getting as close to the letter as I possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we talk about all the time, even within the steering committee, that there is a gray area in this, and I think everybody admits that and knows that. But we don't live in a black and white world on this where you want everything one way or everything the other way. There's the spirit of, hey, this is the way it's supposed to be done, and there may be some scenarios that are, where it's tough to drive exactly 65 on the highway, and you got to go 67 to make it work. What the intent of the rule is to make sure that we don't have anybody doing 80 and just blowing through everything and not playing by the same ground rules as everybody else, and coming up with a bit of an artificial performance that the students ultimately aren't responsible for. That's the intent and the idea behind everything. And certainly that's the way we want everybody to go about doing things the right way, because it does carry a pretty hefty penalty. And so it's really important that we're just aware of the right way to do it, aware of the particulars in all of this, so that everybody is on the up and up with everything.
Yeah, and I think the really awesome thing nowadays is our community is so large and helpful and really encouraging to each other that, I mean, yes, we're going to police each other in the community, but we're also going to support each other. So there are definitely resources out there where if you have something that's, you're not really sure how to crossfade it, or you're not really sure, hey, is this violating the rule or whatever, I think the best course of action would be to ask somebody, and to ask either people within the community. We have some groups set up where people have access to being able to talk to other designers. And then if you get to a point where you really don't know, then we do have the option to talk to WGI administration, and they can help you with how they would probably rule on a situation like that if push came to shove. So I think that it's really important that we strive to stay within this communal spirit, and that's just going to make everyone stronger and better. And I think as long as everyone is trying to do the right thing, then you'll find that's going to open a lot of doors in terms of people wanting to help you.
Yep, absolutely. In terms of some of those resources that Kevin mentioned, every year I get a handful of emails with people that will send me kind of a description of how they want to use the sample, and then send me their audio files and go, is this good? Is it not good? And so usually those are things I can answer pretty quickly, or if it's that gray area that we talked about where it's like, this is a tough one, we do have a group of people that we can bounce that idea off of. So you can send that stuff to me. My email address is caleb@wgi.org, and I can get you an answer, or you can send it to Mark Thurston, the director of percussion as well. He can get you an answer. If instead you're kind of in the workshopping phase and you're just trying something, or you want to pick somebody's brain, you don't quite have it all the way formulated yet, one of the best tools for you would be the Facebook group that we have set up for WGI instructors and directors. If you're not a member of that, just search for it in Facebook. It's WGI instructors and directors. And when you find it, there's two little questions, like what groups do you work with, how long have you been involved in this, and then once you're approved to be in that group, it's a place with a huge community and tons of really bright, smart, and helpful and kind people that can kind of walk you through a process, or give you some advice, or help you be successful and do everything the right way in this. So definitely the resources are out there. I'm sure you can also pick Kevin's brain on this too as a member of the steering committee. He gets those questions all the time. So any one of us are always down to help and give you any insight that we can to try to make sure everybody keeps the activity really special. And that we're all, kind of staying within the lines of things. All right, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of your insight and great ideas on all of this with us, and sharing the video clip as well. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful to a lot of people.
Awesome. And if you need to get a hold of me for a question, my email is kevin@projectrisemusic.com.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Caleb.